Hello, listener. Welcome to Analysis Roulette, the podcast where I get to make people read things that I've been obsessed with for the last 5 years of my life.
Act of wicked villainy.
Hello, listener, and welcome to my crimes. I'm Dia. I use they, them pronouns.
I'm Duck. I use he, they pronouns.
And this week we are talking about the Les Demarres de France, and we will be doing a biographic analysis of them.
Yeah, I'm excited for this.
I'm so excited.
Right, not as excited as you, because these are your thing and I had to read them and we'll now be talking about them, so I can see how you would be vibrating out of your skin.
Genuinely, these are my babies. I love these stories so much. I'm so excited that I got to make you read them.
And I do not regret it. I've had a good time reading these.
Yeah, like I have my copy with me, despite the fact that it's quite dark in my podcasting tent. And you can tell that I love these because I can't think of a type of damage that hasn't been done to this book. It has soot on it. It has water damage. The spine is broken. It's very sticky, and I'm not sure why.
I was going to say, that sounds like me after a LARP event.
All that is to say, I adore Marie de France.
You do. We should put just a brief but necessary warning to listeners with sensitive ears. I never studied French and my pronunciation is awful. Every time there is a French word, French name, I will say it wrong.
The good news is that most of these words are in, like, medieval French. Specifically, they're in 12th century Francian, which I might be pronouncing wrong. So we only have... Really? We're just guessing how they were probably pronounced. Maybe you're right.
Probably not, but your faith is rewarding to me.
You could be. We don't know.
So these are the Les Demarres de France, which are a collection of, I want to say, 12?
Yes.
Yeah, 12 poems written in French some number of centuries ago. I'm a little tired today and cannot count. It's like 8 or 9 centuries ago.
Well, we also don't know 100% for sure.
Right.
Exactly when, but we can say to within a century.
Sort of 800 years ago-ish.
Yeah, so in the 12th century or so.
And we're now in the 21st, so do your maths as you will, listener. They are in verse. This is really all I personally can say for certain about them, because I did not read them in the original, as I am not skilled in the ways of 12th century French. Like, even less so than with modern French am I skilled in the ways. So I read them in translation. I read them in a verse translation. I'm not going to give really any literary attention to the specifics of the verse because I was reading them for the content rather than the poetry. I mean, it's fine. I would not. None of the. It's all in rhyming couplets. The translation I read.
Yeah.
And it's not bad enough to be distracting, but not good enough for me to remember any of the rhymes. It's exactly in that zone.
Yeah, some of the rhymes were notably not great. Others were fine.
Yes, there were some issues with scansion, but in general, I just read it as if it was prose with a remarkably rhythmic nature, and it was fine. These are great, I have to say. Just the underlying stories here, fabulous.
They're so good. There are a couple that I think you will really like that I didn't include because they're not spectacularly relevant to the point.
But yeah, these are worth your time just to go and have a read and add to your stock of like heroic mythical stories.
I mean, these are very much part of the birth of what we now consider sort of romantic, heroic, and chivalric literature.
Absolutely. If you run out of stories about Arthur, go and read Les Demarres de France because they're more of the same. They're the same kind of story.
Exactly.
They're quite short and snappy, and all of the characters make deeply strange decisions, and it's great. I love it.
Yes,
I had a really good time.
It's probably
definitely worse ways to spend your lunch at work than reading these poems.
It's probably worth mentioning which poems you have read out of the 12.
Yes, so I read all the ones you say, and then I think I read one more before I finished lunch.
Cool. So what I sent you was Guigemar, Bisclavret, Yonek, Les Deux Amants, and Lostic.
Yep. and then I think I started again from the beginning. No, I didn't. I started again from like the beginning of whatever page I was on. I'm just glancing through. I think I read Milun, possibly. I didn't do anything on the last section. The translation I'm using is in 4 seconds. So I think I read Milun.
Cool. Let me just... Yeah, cool, awesome. So
Yeah,
you've
which
read
is the
half
one
of them,
that-
which is a good
Yeah, read
number.
I'm sure there's fun. I'm sure the other ones are also fun, but those are the ones that I have read and looked at. I'm going to try to summarize them extremely quickly because I don't want to spend our entire time relaying to you the lays.
Yeah,
Although,
and they have different extents of plot.
Yes. So Bisclaveret is what if there was a werewolf? But crucially, it's what if there was a werewolf and his wife betrayed him to trap him as a werewolf, and then he got himself adopted as the king's beloved, faithful pet wolf, and then eventually he is recognized and released from his werewolfy bonds and rewarded for his faithfulness, and continues to be good friends with the king.
Very good friends.
Very good friends. They are very good friends. Local
Extremely.
king cannot stop promoting his werewolf.
Extremely good platonic bestest buddies.
Oh yeah. I mean, for most of the story, he's a wolf. So literally, yes. Once he turns back to a person, that's their business.
Just think, if somebody is naked in your bed and you're kissing them, there's a point at which you can no longer say, oh yeah, it's just feudal loyalty.
I mean, for contrarian reasons, I want to argue with you, except I agree. So, the Lay of Lanval is, there is a knight. He is an Arthurian knight. He is a knight of the Round Table. Arthur, he is salty because he is comparatively poor and Arthur isn't giving him enough prizes and land and things.
Mm.
He meets a fairy lady who promises him everything he wants if he simply does not reveal her existence. He immediately fails at this by getting into a conversation with Arthur's queen and telling her she does not hold a candle to... Well, she's trying to seduce him, and he's like, lol, no, I have a lady, and she's way hotter than you. And she is mortally insulted. And then they have a trial over him insulting the queen. And it's fine, because the fairy queen turns up, and everyone agrees, oh no, she's way hotter than the queen. So Lanval is vindicated, because everything he said was true. He didn't slander the queen. He spoke absolutely truly that she is not as pretty as his lady. And they're like, as a matter of simple justice, he's telling the truth. So we have to let him go. And then he jumps onto her horse behind her and rides off to Fairy.
Mm.
Les Deux Amants is a tragedy. You could fully turn it into a Disney movie, but they would make the ending happy.
Yeah.
And it would
Guillermo
no longer...
del Toro movie, though.
Yeah, maybe.
I could see that.
The King's Daughter, it's a classic, I am setting a trial which you must beat before you can marry my daughter. And the trial is you must carry her all the way up the mountain without putting her down. And there's a particular... Does he have a name?
I don't
Do
think
either of
he
them
does.
have names?
Not a lot of people don't
The
have
youth.
names in these.
Yeah, the youth. The young man. There's an actual... He's in love with her, she's in love with him. They're both very sad about the whole... There's a trial thing. He goes off to train with a witch to get strong, and also to get a potion of strength from the witch. And then he carries the King's Daughter all the way up the mountain, and she's like, you should take the potion now, at various points. And he's like, no, I can do this. And then as the instant they make it to the top of the mountain, he dies of overexertion, having never taken the potion. And then she dies of grief.
As
No
women
one ever
seem
takes the
to
potion.
do in Arthurian times.
There's a lot of people are grieved unto death in these stories.
Yeah.
So the Lay of Yonok is great.
I love Yonok.
It's just particularly good. There's a maiden. She's locked in a tower by her husband, who is old and terrible. and she looks out the window one day and wishes that she could have a handsome young lover, and then a bird flies in her window and turns into a handsome young man, and then she gets her wish. But they are being spied on by the old woman who is her jailer on behalf of her husband, who tells her husband about this whole situation and then sets a bunch of spikes around the window so that when he flies in bird form, he is horribly wounded.
Yes.
So he flies back whence he came, leaving a trail of blood. The lady does not climb out of the tower. This is not any kind of, ties her hair to the bars. The lay is very clear. She just jumps out of the tower. It's a miracle she survives. Follows the blood trail all the way to the barrow, goes into the barrow and out the other side into Fairy, goes down to the Fairy City, finds her lover dying there, and he gives her a prophecy and a sword, and then says, and now you should run away, because the moment I die, if you're still here, they are going to murder you. So she does, and he does, and they don't because she has left. And then she bears a son, which is her lover's son, not her husband's son. When the son becomes an adult, they go and visit Caerleon. I don't think for any particular reason, or not plot reason. It's serendipitous that they visit Caerleon, and the lover is buried there. So she fulfills the prophecy by giving the sword to her son and being like, "This is your real dad." And the son that is, takes the sword, and I think, the order of things it goes in is she gives her son the sword, explains everything about where he came from, and then faints on the tomb and dies of grief. And then the son, because she's died of grief, beheads the husband. So it's good news. They are buried together, and they have been avenged. Happy ending.
Truly, grief was a major cause of death for women in all of history.
It's true. The lay of... I am intimidated by the accent on the U, and I don't think it's pronounced Laustic.
Laustic is fine.
Okay, I'm calling it Laustic.
The accent on the U is very much just... It's not changing the pronunciation of the U, if I'm correct. It's putting emphasis on it, so it's Laustic. But I could be getting that completely wrong from memory.
Okay, I'm going to say it badly as Laustic, because that's what I've been reading it as in my head. But it's called it's the Nightingale. There are two knights, and they are best friends, and they built their houses like next to each other on neighboring estates. They've built them so close that one of them can lean out the window and have personal and romantic conversations with the other one's wife.
What happened to Ant and Dec?
I assume they were doing it in deliberate reference to these medieval lays. They have what's a very chivalric romance thing going on, because they're not actually meeting in person to get up to anything.
Unless
they're
there are some very interestingly placed windows.
They have very interestingly placed windows, and they're having conversations. And she only gets up to have these conversations when her husband is asleep. But one day he wakes up. Well, I think the implication is that he is aware that she does this sometimes. But one day he's awake enough to challenge her on it. It's like, what are you doing by the window? And she says, I'm listening to the nightingale. So he has all his servants go and hunt through the orchards until they find a nightingale, a literal nightingale, and kill the nightingale. And he sort of brings it to her and offers it up and is like, good news. I have killed the nightingale, so it won't disturb your sleep any longer, and you can stay in bed with me. And she's like, I think he's caught on to us here. I think a point is being made. So I'm going to have to stop having these window conversations with his best friend. But I don't want the best friend to think that I've stopped loving him. It's just that I don't want to die. So I'm going to send the nightingale wrapped in silk to my lover to sort of explain the situation. Which I personally would find somewhat cryptic, but maybe she'd explained before the nightingale was killed. I don't know.
Possibly he overheard the nightingale conversation, if these windows are that close.
To be fair, she was right. But immediately prior to the nightingale conversation, she was talking to him. So yeah, he must have been there for the nightingale conversation. Be aware. There, we've solved the plot point. Well done. The plot hole is filled by me not remembering literally where people are standing in the scene.
I mean, the layout of these houses is a mystery.
Yeah, but he puts the nightingale in like a gilded reliquary and carries it around everywhere. It's tragic. It's very romantically tragic.
It's
No one dies in
deeply
that one,
chivalric.
and I
The
also read the
nightingale
Lay of
dies.
Milun. The nightingale dies. It's very sad for the nightingale. The nightingale, I'm not sure is a person.
Mm.
I'm not sure it's not. This is like a medieval fairy tale. It could be. Anything is possible.
Mm.
And then I also read the Lay of Milun, where we have. You'll be shocked to hear this, listener. You won't be detecting this pattern at all. Milun is, a handsome young knight, and there's a lady, and they're in love. And they're in love, and she has a baby. She has a son who is sent off to, I think, her sister to raise, because her sister is married, so that's all fine. And also, you don't have to admit, honor is satisfied if nobody says whose illegitimate child the one that appeared on the doorstep is.
Mm.
But the son is sent away secretly to her sister to raise.
Yeah.
And then she is married off to someone else. And they spend several years sending a trained swan back and forth with letters in its feathers, which is amazing.
Of all the birds.
I love how much logistical attention is given to explaining why the swan will fly back to him, and absolutely zero is given to explaining why it will fly to her. I enjoy that fully, exactly half of this problem is fully explained, and the other half is simply glossed over entirely.
Yeah.
But they're just sending letters back and forth. The son grows up, and he goes off to France to be a famous tournament knight. But he's under an assumed name. And Milun hears about this famous tournament knight and is like, I must fight him. Because it's terrible that no Welsh knight has ever beaten this famous tournament knight, so I must go and beat him. And they meet up at Mont Saint Michel and have a tournament, and they have a touching reunion in the middle of a joust. So the son unhorses the father, and like as the father is getting he unhorses the father, and the father's helmet comes off, revealing that he is venerable and grey. And the son is like, well, now I am embarrassed because I have knocked an old man off his horse. Let me help you back on your horse. Which means they are close enough to have a conversation, and the father says, so who are you anyway? And the son explains where he came from, and the father goes, this rings a bell. I'm your dad. Or at least tells his half of the story and goes, I have a matching half a story, so I think I'm probably your father.
It would be amazing if he wasn't.
It would be great. It would be really funny. But they recognize each other, and they have a happy reunion. And they agree that specifically because his mother has been wronged by being forcibly married off to this other lord, the son is going to sort of revenge for her by going and killing her husband. But fascinatingly, this is wholly irrelevant to the plot, because what happens is just by the time they have ridden back to the castle, just the lord randomly dies.
Sure.
He's dead by the time they get there. So they don't have to do any murder. They just ride home and get married. But it's all very nice. All of these stories are great. I love them.
Am I correct that you also read Gigama?
You should be. I did read all the ones I was given on my list.
Just because that was not summarised, do you want me to run through it?
Yeah, go for it.
So Gigama, and bear in mind, I did not...
Yes, I did read Gigama. I'm looking at the table of contents. I did definitely read Gigama. I just skimmed over it in my retellings.
Yes. So Gigama is the story of a young lord, Gigama, who is great at everything. He's very handsome, very noble, good at everything, except finding a wife.
Everyone is very worried about him and how he's going to be sad all his life because he fails to get married.
He doesn't seem that concerned about this. He's out partying with his friends, going hunting in the woods, when one day he sees a gender-confused deer.
Yes.
Which is a female deer that has antlers and is presumably of a species where that is not typical.
Right. He sees a deer who we understand textually to be intersex.
Yes. And he tries to shoot it, and the arrow somehow fatally wounds the deer, but ricochets back and stabs Gigama in the thigh.
Yes, the text says
Meaningful
the thigh.
pause.
The text does say in the thigh.
At which point the deer says, yeah, so you're going to die unless you find a woman who's willing to suffer for you.
And he's like, guess I'll die.
Yep. He tells his squire, like, go tell my friends I'm going to die. I'm going to just wander off and die quietly in the woods because I'm not going to find a woman.
I also love his attitude where he's like, I am not up for partying and people right now. I'm going to go die quietly by myself.
I love Gugemar.
We're doing a low energy death.
So he finds a boat and figures, what the hell, this might as well happen. He gets on the boat. It takes him to a sort of walled, vaguely mystical city where he does in fact find a woman. Unfortunately, she's married to the Lord, I believe, Baron.
Right, it's like a
ruler
walled
of this
garden
area
on a cliff, where she's been put to stop her from having any affairs.
It does not stop her from having this affair.
Gigamar turns up, she has this affair.
Her husband finds out and pretty much skimming over stuff, kicks Gigamar out. But before that happens, they find out they've been caught, so she ties a knot into his shirt and says, don't marry any woman who can't undo that knot. And he puts a belt on her and says, don't
love any man.
Don't love any man. It's really unclear. She's already married. Don't love any man who can't undo that belt.
Right, and textually, most of the time when love is being used as the verb in that context, it does mean have sex with.
Yeah, or at least like have some sort of physical intimacy with.
Yeah, it's not talking about emotional.
Yeah,
necessarily.
Which how she's supposed to explain that to her husband who is about to try and murder him? I don't know.
Unclear.
Yeah, but he does not get murdered. He goes home. He now has he continues his successful career as a knight. Loads of women try to undo the shirt. There's some jousting. There's some war.
Yep.
That summarizes a lot of medieval times.
Meanwhile, the lady has been banished to a tower where she suffers many dolors.
Yes. While he's just partying around France.
She's in the tower having a terrible time.
But he does ultimately find her.
Right,
through the course of one of his wars.
The tower and gets on another mystical boat and ends up in this. He's gone to a castle to, I think to try and kind of negotiate not having a siege.
Yes, I think they are under siege, and he is there to break the siege.
Right, he's technically enemies with the person whose house he's in, but crucially not in a way where they're going to murder each other, just in a way where they're on opposing sides.
She is just like there vibing.
She's there. Partaking of the gentleman's hospitality because a lady comes by in distress and you give her a brew for the night and you feed her dinner. That's what you do. He also this is Meriadu, whose name I'm definitely mispronouncing, who would like to marry the lady, but she explains the whole belt situation, and he's like, that is very sweet and noble. Takes her dress off and tries to undo the belt anyway, but can't, so he leaves her be.
Yeah.
And then goes, wait a minute, I think this is Gigamar's lady that he's always talking about. Because of this whole belt thing, and he's got that shirt, and I bet this is the same thing.
Again, it would be incredible if it was not.
It's just some other lady. He sits them next to each other at dinner, and Gigamar does not recognize her, presumably because of the time that has passed, although there may also be mystical things going on. But they figure out that they are the same people. The shirt is undone, and the belt is undone, and they their host tries to seize the lady anyway and be like, but I want her. And Gigamar is like, well, now I'm definitely going to lay siege to you, and disappears with his lady, and then they fight, and Meriadu gets killed, and Gigamar and his lady are happy ever after in an extremely straight and gender-conforming way.
Very normal.
All of this is normal. Gigamar at no point got shot in the dick.
Yep. I had a professor who liked to say that the most interesting things about Gigamar are that he was completely fine prior to being shot in the dick, and that he became an absolute monster as soon as he got married to a woman.
Right, as soon as he's got married to a woman, he's like, now I'm just going to murder everyone in this castle.
You may be able to tell that I have some history with these texts, dear listener. So yeah, those are, I think we just ran through 7. There are 12 total, so we haven't covered Equitin, Le Fresne, Chativel or Chevrefoil or Eliduc. all of which are great, and I cannot recommend highly enough to listeners that you go read these stories. They're really good. They're widely available for free in English.
They are so far out of copyright, they have not heard of it.
Yes. I mean, if you really want to, I also recommend learning medieval French and reading them in the original, but that might be a tall order for advice you got from a podcast.
That's a lot of effort. If you're into this sort of thing, don't feel obliged.
No, actually, I'm saying do feel obliged. You are morally obliged now to join the Marie de France fan club.
But not necessarily in French. That's the only part I'm saying.
Yeah.
You do have to read these poems. You do not have to read them in the original.
That's
the compromise we're making with our principles.
Sure.
Okay, so our goal today is a biographical reading, which is to say, so this works very well with what we did last time, because, well, yeah, last time we did a reading where we kind of pretend we know nothing at all about Japan and take this anime and work out what kind of culture would have produced this work. Biographical reading is the same sort of thing, but for the author, like the specific person who wrote the work.
Though the difference in task really is we actually do know very little about Marie de France as a person, as a historical figure, as opposed to the existence of Japan, which is not necessarily a mystery.
Yes, I do wish to assure the listener that we do know about the existence of medieval France, but unlike last time, we're kind of having to draw quite directly on that knowledge to work out anything about this author.
Yeah.
Because we don't have any of the biographical details. We're not pretending medieval France is a lost culture. It is part of the evidence we're using to piece together the person who wrote the works. Where's my notes? Come to me, my notes. There we are. Okay, I'm going to start at the top. Things we know about the person Marie de France. You ready? This is a real game changer of an insight.
Let's have it.
She was French. It's a thing we know
Source?
about her. She's called Marie de France, and she was writing in French.
Yes.
However, we can also conclude she was probably not in France, at least when she was writing and publishing these things. Because if you are in France, being the French one is not a very helpful disambiguator. In order to be called Marie de France and not Marie the Walloon or something, you need to not be in France, but to be French. My guess is, it is a guess. Like, I'm fairly confident she was probably French, or, from some area that was called France at the time. Borders move. But probably, she was French as understood by the people around her at the time.
Yeah.
Who did not consider themselves to be French.
I will say, we mentioned earlier the language that this is written in was Francien, a word I've always struggled to pronounce. Please don't email us. I speak French, I just have a lisp.
I don't speak French. I just do this on purpose.
But that is the dialect that was spoken sort of around Ile-de-France and what is now Paris, and is still Ile-de-France. So it's probably about as French as anyone was at this point in time.
Yeah, so it's quite sort of centrally and specifically French.
Yeah. There are some Anglo-Norman, some Breton words in her writings, but primarily she is like from the France bit of France.
Right. But she may have been at the time, less French, but now French bit of France. And still been Marie the French.
Yes. I mean, we have reasons to believe she wasn't historically, which I know you are aware of from our conversations, but for purely the sake of literary analysis, she could have been in, like, Alsace.
Well, yes. Although I think just from the amount of that's in these stories, she writes a lot about, like, a lot of her knights are, like, Welsh or Norman.
Yeah.
Which leans towards she may have been in England or Wales.
This seems plausible, yes.
Like, that's very much something where I'd want better sources than just I've read half the poems.
I mean, I am open to being questioned. I feel like that's better than me just jumping in with facts intermittently. I just can't promise I'll be able to answer things.
I think what I'll do is, if I, just for structure's sake, if I sort of run through the things that I think I can know, and then we'll do a wrap-up of anything I was right about.
Sounds good.
Here is the second blowing the case wide open thing I have gleaned from this poetry.
Sure.
She was literate.
Probably, yeah. I mean, it seems likely.
Right, and I realise that seems like not worth mentioning, but for someone in the 12th century, being literate is a distinguishing feature.
Yeah.
Most people were not.
Plenty of nobles were
Literacy
not.
was right, exactly. Literacy was not just not universal. Literacy wasn't even necessary to be, a powerful politician and wielder of treaties. You could be educated and not literate by the standards and understandings of the time, because this is a barbarian corner of the world.
Yes, this is the edge of the world where the weapons come from, as I like to call it.
Right. There are many parts of the world in the 12th century where to be an educated person, you had to read and write. France and England were not among them.
Yeah.
To the point where, in order to claim right of the clergy and be tried in clerical courts for your crimes, which were more forgiving than regular courts, the proof that you were, in fact, a clergyman was be able to read like a sentence or two of the Bible in Latin. Like, that was all the proof needed, because nobody else would be able to read Latin. So if you could read Latin, you must be a cleric. So Marie de France was reading and writing, which, I've said it was not universal. It was also not unknown, but it is a distinguishing feature. It tells us something about sort of her access to education. And expanding off of that, besides being literate, she was familiar with the stories of the time. So one of these lays, so Lanval, is an Arthurian piece. Lanval is a knight of the Round Table serving King Arthur. Like, I'm not extrapolating here. That is directly in the words of the text. He is one of Arthur's knights.
Yeah.
And Arthur isn't the kind of oral history ancient myth that we tend to present it as. Arthur and the various stories about Arthur and his knights are a literary tradition that went through a couple of movements. So they went from Welsh to French, and then they came back across the Channel to England and into English. And my understanding is it's sort of close to contemporary with these lays, that the Arthur stories were being disseminated and becoming popular in French.
I mean, I believe, again, I am real bad at numbers, so I could get any of these wrong at any moment, but I believe these are some of the earliest Arthurian texts in French. So Marie was very much a forerunner of this genre. But the matter of Britain, the whole, not just Arthur, but other sort of chivalric texts of that ilk, were probably available to people.
Yeah. So what I'm thinking is
at least in part,
Marie's not just literate, but she's engaged with the literature of her time. Like, she is part of the community of writers.
I mean, Breton lay as a form were definitely well known.
Yeah, she's not necessarily sort of meeting other writers, but her works are part of the conversation. There's a back and forth with the forms of poetry that you can write that people want to hear, with the kinds of stories you can tell, with the kinds of characters who can appear in those stories, without needing much explanation, because it's a body of stories that, it's a corpus of stories that people know to exist, so you can add to it.
Yeah, there's a corpus
you can
probably
say,
that's very different.
King Arthur. He was a King Arthur knight, and people will go, oh yeah, I know who King Arthur was. I understand the setting.
Yeah, it might be a corpus that's very different to what we're aware of now, but there was probably a corpus of stories that people would have known of.
Yeah, certainly enough that, you understand the character of Arthur, you understand Arthur's queen as a character. Here's another story in that setting.
Yeah.
Which requires not only other people to be writing it, but you to be reading what they wrote and participating in that conversation. So we've got somebody who is educated enough to be literate, and also connected enough to literary culture at the time to be sort of directly participating. This is not a group of poems written in isolation by somebody who didn't understand the kind of things being written at the time. This is part of the sorts of things that were being written at the time. It was also notable to me that another of the lays, not Lanval, not Gigamar, one of the other ones, the one with the bird.
Narrow it down.
With the shape-shifting bird.
Oh, Yonek.
Yes.
There's a lot of birds in these.
It's fair. No, you're right. But Yonak has the protagonist entering into fairy by passing through a barrow.
Yes.
I don't know if that's also a French trope.
Not to my knowledge.
It wouldn't surprise me if we share it with the continental mainland. But it was very recognizable to me as an English person. That is how you get to fairy. You go under the hill and you come out somewhere else, and that place is fairy. The magic is stronger and weirder there.
Mm.
Which again, she wasn't making that up. From new, at least. She was working with established story structures. One of the things you can do in a story is go under the hill.
Yeah.
It usually ends badly, but things had already gone bad in Yonak.
She was not having a great day at that point.
Right, she was not starting from a high point. My husband has just...
Except literally.
Probably murdered my lover. I have followed his blood trail all the way into fairy, and my journey began with jumping out of a tower.
Yeah.
Yeah. A good time is not being had.
There is a possibly apocryphal story of A.A. Gill, the food writer, going to a museum in Scotland and putting on one of those, those audio headphone things they have for you to watch videos halfway. That are on the loop.
The other
that he put on one of those that was halfway through a video about the history of Scotland, and the first sentence he heard was, "And then things got much worse." That is how I feel about all of the women in these stories. It's just no matter where you start, the next sentence is, "And then things got much worse."
You're not wrong. Okay. So we know she was from France. We know she was literate. We know she was engaged with literature. We can glean something about her social status from those facts.
Mm.
We can glean another point about her social status from the things she was writing about. She was writing about knights and ladies and lords and fairy queens. Even messengers seem to be nobility, although that could be a translation artifact. My translation being in verse makes me a little cautious with what would seem like minor details to a translator, because as opposed to with prose, you may choose your words based on your rhyme scheme.
Yes.
So there's a point where there's a messenger who brings the swan, who's described as that lord. That may just be, I wanted a short word that fit.
Yeah, I think there are lords. I'm not going to pretend I can remember all of the words in medieval French off the top of my head. But I think there are lords in the text at various points.
Yeah. But I think what we can say with certainty is these are not stories about the common folk.
Yeah.
Like even romanticized and sanitized common folk, they're not here. There are no shepherds, cooks, maids. Well, there's some ladies' maids, but there's no scullery maids. Farmers. There are no farriers in these stories. The stories about the nobility.
There are at most squires.
Yeah. Who are sort of in training to be.
Yeah.
Yeah. There are some squires. It's fair. But those are the kind of the lowest people. If the lowest people on screen are squires and ladies' maids, we are dealing with nobility. And it's specifically
animals.
I would not assume that these are not noble animals.
That's fair.
We have swans and nightingales and war horses.
I just assume that the genderqueer deer has to be a communist.
I would put to you that the genderqueer deer, although a communist, was nonetheless born into wealth. The genderqueer deer is an Oxford-educated communist with a rich father.
Sure.
Like, their principles are good, but they are nonetheless, technically speaking, an aristocrat. Not only are these stories about an aristocracy, but they're like... And this is of the time, but also is a literary thing. They are stories about chivalry. They're stories about specifically the chivalric honor code, which is worth talking about. It's slightly a tangent, but I do want to talk for a bit about chivalry isn't an ethics code.
Yeah.
People seem to get these mixed up, at least on Tumblr. I'm not going to claim I've done a wider survey. This is from things I've seen on Tumblr. But mixing up chivalry with sort of an ethical stance, and it's not that at all. It is an honor code. You might praise a man for merciful generosity if he lets an unfaithful wife live, but chivalry allows him to kill her
Yeah.
Chivalry lets you extract infinite rent from your feudal subjects, but it requires you to be hospitable to your social equals and let them challenge you to duels in the morning and not poison them tonight instead.
I think it's that upholding the code of chivalry may be a significant part of your ethical beliefs, and was for many people.
Right, but it's not in itself ethics.
Yeah, it is not in itself a code of ethics by which you can live your life in all circumstances.
Yes, and it's not in itself something that maps to what we would now consider good behavior.
Yeah.
Marie de France neither explains nor challenges this code. Like, she just assumes it as a fact of the world.
Yeah.
You are expected to know about chivalry the same way you are expected to know about horses.
Yeah.
Which is fascinating because nonetheless, all of the ones I've read, like she expected you to just know what chivalry was and to understand this code of behavior, and nonetheless wrote mainly about people violating the marriage section of that code.
I think honestly, like, one of the things I find most fascinating about any of these stories is there's a section in Yonek where the wife, trapped in her little tower, explicitly says, hey, in all the stories I've read about, when a wife is horribly mistreated, she has an affair. Why don't I get to have an affair? I'm definitely being mistreated. And that's such a fascinating thing to have a character in a poem say.
Right, and it's not, and that's the clearest in-text statement of it, but it kind of runs all through these poems that women having lovers is held up as essentially the core of romantic love. It's an inherently magical and blessed state. Unlike having a husband, which is just terrible.
See, husbands are the worst throughout this.
Right, husbands are terrible and oppressive, and it's terrible to have one.
Apart from Biographical.
Apart from Biographical. But, well...
Who was just, like, not there.
Because,
that was his sin. He was just not there.
Right. Well, I have a point to make there as well, because my next sentence of my notes. So the only time she condemns adultery is in Bisklavre, and it's not the adultery, it's the turning to trickery to put the lover over the marriage, even though marriage is terrible.
Yeah.
So it's, as long as the pain of being caught or being separated falls on the lovers and isn't transferred over to the marriage, then having a lover is good. It's very interesting that like romantic love is positioned outside of marriage, but as a matter of ethics, subordinate to it. Like it's almost the expectation of how love works is you have a husband who you hate, but to whom you owe duty, and you have a lover whom you love but have to keep secret, because if you're found out, then somebody has to be murdered, or at least you have to be separated. And if you don't let that part happen, you're the bad guy.
Yeah.
But you can have all the affairs you want as long as you still pay that duty to your husband.
To be honest, seems fair.
Right, I'm not arguing with it.
If everyone was on the same team here, this would be a working system.
Right, I just think it's very interesting. I think we can glean something from that about how our author and the society she was writing in and for, like, thought about sexual ethics.
Yeah.
Fidelity is not just who are you having sex with, but it's not even primarily that, because everyone's got lovers and it's sort of fine, because the fidelity that you owe is a duty and your husband is your liege, very literally. You owe him obedience within limits, but it's more that you owe him the kind of obedience where his orders have to supersede anyone else's. But you can do whatever you like until he gives the orders. So as long as you can keep it secret and he doesn't know, you're not doing anything wrong. But when he knows, he is going to make you stop, and then you do have to stop because you've been told then. But if you can set things up so you don't get told, you're good. And that's where love is outside of marriage. Specifically, it's love is an adulterous thing, which is a great album name.
It really is. I was just thinking, like, I want that on a t-shirt.
Possibly with a picture of an intersex deer.
Do we have merch yet? Can we make that happen?
We could make that happen. I'm happy for that to be on a shirt.
Can't be that hard to get started on Redbubble, right?
We could set that up literally tonight. If it's just
Okay.
words. If we want art, we have to commission someone. Our promise to you, listener, is we're not doing AI art t-shirts. Because gross.
Because gross, and also because that sounds like I would have to learn more about AI than I want to know.
Yeah, I do not wish to have prompting skills.
No. I'm sure there is a learning curve, I just don't want to learn it.
Right, exactly. I'm not saying there isn't a skill there. I just, in the same way as I have no desire to learn underwater tiddlywinks.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's skill involved. To be fair, actually, that's unfair to the underwater tiddlywinks. I have no moral objection to underwater tiddlywinks. I wish you joy of your hobby. AI art is more actively stolen than the joy anyone is getting from interesting swimming exercises.
Sure.
This is a tangent of a high degree.
Yeah. Though I do actually now want to hear you run by me an entire thesis on the merits of underwater tiddlywinks versus AI prompting as hobbies.
It's a short thesis. Underwater tiddlywinks, although funny to say, is just a hobby. Have fun. Don't drown each other. Seems like a harmless way to spend your time. You probably get some healthy exercise and some good socialization out of it. Whereas AI is bad. Here ends the thing.
Okay, cool. That's our stance, listeners.
That's our stance. Our stance is also that it's so pervasive through the structure of these poems and how the society in these poems works and thinks about sex and love that I'm actively reluctant to sort of project it back and say this must be because the author was having an affair. I do feel confident in saying this was how the author was thinking about romance and love and sex. Like, it's so built in. I don't think she's doing this for effect. These are her real understanding, her real worldview on these things. It is entirely possible that she was also having affairs. It seems to me to be quite likely that she was married to someone reasonably wealthy, just based on her being, somebody who was writing stuff at the time. Because I don't think this is. I mean, it really depends how permissive convents were at the time. But generally speaking, if the convent is doing its actual job, you're too busy to write romantic lays. And too cloistered to publish them. So I think it's more likely that she's a noble lady, probably married to a noble gentleman, who has enough leisure time to be writing poetry.
We do have some nuns of the era who wrote poetry and wrote travelogues and things like that. It would not be implausible.
It's not out of the question by any means. And various abbesses were quite politically powerful figures, which is not a position you get into by staying in your nunnery and never interacting with anyone.
Yeah, there are a variety of historical figures who some scholars have claimed could potentially have been the real identity of Marie de France. And to my knowledge, 2 of them are abbesses. Might have been more.
Nice.
So people have said this, and those people were not, completely incomprehending of the texts.
Yes, although I think notable there is the difference between an abbess and just a regular nun. As the person who is in the position of most power, controlling most of the wealth of the abbey, is a different position to be in than a cloistered nun.
Yeah.
Also, more likely to go to a person of noble origin.
Yeah.
Not absolutely guaranteed. Which is another way of saying not all holy orders are or have been corrupt. Bold claim, I know, but that's what I'm saying, is sometimes people are sincere in their religion and do in fact do their best to follow the rule to which they have sworn themselves. And sometimes that rule does say that the person in charge of the abbey shouldn't just be whichever one has the noblest father. Sometimes it doesn't, to be fair. It's not universal in holy orders for that to be a rule. I wish we did know who she was, because I would love to have more than these little snippets that I've managed to piece together. Because I feel like most of what I've managed to put together is just, she was someone.
Yeah.
In the society she was from, and she was French.
Yeah, I mean, there are bits that we've managed to glean about her, but it is all through biographical reading and like biographical reading informed by context of the times, which you do not have available to you. But this
Right,
is
a
the school of
weighted knowledge
analysis.
of everything than I have.
Yeah, and this is the school of analysis that gave us everything we know about Marie de France. So most scholars believe that she was sort of working at a court in England somewhere and was well known at the court of King Henry II. It's believed that she sort of moved to England at some point in her life from somewhere between Ile-de-France and the Anglo-Norman regions of France.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of this is stuff that you would only really glean from her writings, not just the lay, which are her best known, but also she did some Saints' Lives, some Aesop's Fables, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But it is all from biographical reading, which is what's really cool about getting to do this week.
I'm glad that you've not. I was going to say I'm glad that you've not told me I'm absolutely wrong about anything, but I probably was. Please tell me what thing I was absolutely wrong about.
I don't think you were absolutely wrong about anything.
Sometimes it helps me, non-committal listener, to say I don't know anything about this person. She existed.
Yeah, I mean, the stuff that I find interesting personally is the side of it that is like, okay, there's a lot of interesting themes here which are not that common in literature of the era. What does that tell us about Marie? Because she's
I would tentatively add to our store of minimal biographic facts some manner of queerness.
You don't say.
Yeah, I'm making that bold stance. Some manner of queerness, particularly along the what is gender we just don't know side.
I identify very, very strongly with Marie de France. And one of the things I've always found very interesting about her is that she very forwardly puts her identity, which isn't that rare for medieval chroniclers or anything. But like in Guillemot, she says, "My name is Marie and I am French." That's how she introduces herself.
My translation didn't have that. It had my translation, I have to say, had a somewhat terrible prologue.
Yes.
About the philosophy of how I should translate poems for you, but written by the translator, not by Marie.
Yes, in I believe it's Guillemot. I could be wrong. It says, "Marie est nom, je suis de France." Marie is my name. I have the name Marie, and I am from France. And I really like that. That's sort of how she opens these stories. She goes, "I am French, and I want to tell you these stories of France, these myths of Brittany."
Yeah, I like that.
And she also is identifying Brittany as part of France. In the
controversial
12th
subject
century.
even then.
She has some bold opinions.
Right. Although at the court of Henry, she was perhaps not on the side of Henry.
Yes, I'm not sure. There are some people who think she was his half-sister? Something like that. That's one of the abbesses.
It is a very sibling thing to
I
put it in
love
your book.
the idea that she's...
Just so everyone knows, Brittany is not his.
Brittany belongs to France, and I know that because I am French. Like, yeah.
Don't believe a word Harry says. Yep.
There's something very sweet about that idea. But yeah, like, I really identify with Marie as a writer. I think there's something about her stories that really, really speaks to me. And it is a queerness thing. And I'm not the only one.
Right. It's one of those things where reading as a modern reader, sort of without that background of things like, when we say he was shot in the thigh, this is a likely euphemism. Things like this, which I only know because you've told me. It's easy to miss the queerness because we're unfamiliar with the expected gender roles. But that doesn't mean it isn't there. That just means that we're not reading it.
Yeah. And also, I think a lot of translations are unsure of how to handle expressions of emotion and gender and love with which they are unfamiliar.
Yes. And like we talked about Gigama with the deer with antlers and the getting shot in the thigh.
Yes.
But I also want to come back again to Yonick, because Yonick, one of Yonick's shapeshifter thing, he turns into a bird in order to fly up to the window. But there's a whole scene where they've been overheard in the ladies' chambers, and they hatch this plan this is earlier in the story. He flies in through the window as a bird and turns into a handsome young man, and she's like, "You're super cute, but I think you might be a demon," which I'm not into. On account of all the shape-shifting magic, and he says, "Well, I can prove this to you because I will take the sacrament. I'll take communion," which is obviously something I could not do if I was a demon. And the way they achieve this is she pretends to be feeling deathly ill the next morning, so the priest will come to her room and give her the sacrament. Except it's actually him pretending to be her. Like, the shape-shifting, this ideal lover is someone who can shape-shift into you across the gender line. The ideal lover is someone who can shapeshift into a woman. That's interesting. It's not really dwelt on. It's not the point of the story, but I think it's interesting.
Absolutely. I mentioned that I've been obsessed with these stories for quite a while now. I actually did some of my undergrad coursework on queer theory within these stories, and one of the things I wrote about in that was this idea that heterosexuality is a sort of omnipresent oppressive force.
Yes, even like, especially in husbands, but even with lovers, you have to have one.
And even with wives.
Wives especially.
Sort of this... Many of these characters are dominated either by the oppressive will of their partner or by the oppressive force of society to find a partner to enact that will upon you. And the only times that these characters get to experience happiness or freedom is when they are rejecting that force. Yes. And they are punished for it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Landval has some interesting stuff there where the deal is you can have your perfect lover, you can have your riches, you can have your everyone liking you, provided you give up the social status of ever being able to claim to have achieved correct heterosexuality. Like, that's the real sacrifice in that bargain. Is it's not just you have to keep me secret, you have to keep my existence secret, and keeping my existence secret means you have nothing to say when the Queen says, "Think you might be gay, Landval, and you can prove it by sleeping with me."
Yeah, I mean, when he turns down the Queen, the first thing she says is, "Well, I've heard loads of people say you don't like women. You like young men."
Yes, she explicitly accuses him of being both gay and pedophilic.
Yeah.
To which, which is why
from
he makes his
memory,
bargain
in the text, the term is much less young men and more youths.
Yes.
How he ends up on trial for having gay thoughts.
Well, for having gay thoughts and insulting the Queen.
Having gay thoughts that prevented him from being attracted to the Queen.
Yes. Which is sort of... The bargain made with the fairy lady is not just one of you have to keep your love a secret. It's you have to let people go on assuming that you are gay.
Yeah.
And that tension of everyone assumes that you are single, but actually you have a lover, but you have to keep them secret, which means they assume you're gay. That's a very gay thing. Like, everyone assumes you're gay because you are officially single, but actually you do have a lover, but you can't tell them that because that would just prove that you're gay. That's a gay mood.
And also, people are hitting on you and then putting you in mortal danger when you turn them down.
Yes. And the happy ending is you run away to fairy with your lover.
Which is very interesting if this is like a little Arthuriana tangent, but a lot of people have aligned Landval with Lancelot.
Mm-hmm.
As sort of this youngest and handsomest of Arthur's knights, this sort of...
The one the Queen's hitting on.
The one who the Queen has some kind of romantic connection with, the one who also is connected to a mysterious French fairy lady, because depending on which tradition you're reading, Lancelot is the son of either a mysterious river fairy or the Lady in the Lake, depending on how you're reading things.
Mm-hmm.
It's very interesting to me that this version of the story, he doesn't bring about the doom of society by having a fling with the Queen.
No, he brings about his own doom by not having one.
Yeah. And that's just pretty gay to me.
Right! Also, how to be extremely pure when women keep throwing themselves at you. Be gay.
Yeah.
Only notice half the time and be uninterested when you do.
Yeah. And we have not even talked about my little baby boy.
Which one?
Bisclafé is the son of my heart. I
Let's
love
talk
him
about
so
Bisclafé.
much. Can we talk about the werewolf in the room?
Let's talk about the werewolf who is extremely devoted to his king.
He is so good.
And he is done wrong, is Bisclafé.
He is maligned. He is a little werewolf boy who just wanted to live his life being a good husband and a good knight.
Right, he's a good husband, he's a good knight. He goes out a couple of nights a week to take all his clothes off and run naked through the woods as a werewolf.
Yeah.
Which, itself, a little bit gay.
That's so gay.
It's a gay mood.
I mean, if nothing else, he's at least a furry.
He's going out a couple of nights a week to play D&D with his queer friends.
And his wife doesn't like it.
And his wife is like, I'm certain you must be having an affair, because why else would you be sneaking off all the time? He's like, I'm literally not sneaking off. I tell you I'm going out. She's like, yeah, but you don't tell me where.
And to be fair, presumably coming back somewhat dishevelled, given that he's taken his clothes off and run around in the woods as a wolf for several hours.
Right. So she drags it out of him that he's a werewolf, and that he takes his clothes off and runs around in the woods. And if anyone were to see him like that and to take his clothes away from him, then he'd be stuck as a werewolf.
Mm.
Which she promptly does.
To be fair, she has a 5-second think about this, at which point she goes, well, if anyone knew that my husband was a werewolf running around all naked and werewolfy in the woods, it would be shameful on me. So,
and I've got this convenient, available potential lover.
I guess I'll just turn my husband into a wolf and run off with my toy boy.
Right, I'll shack up with the toy boy, who is perfectly willing to help me out with the clothes theft. And all my problems are solved, and I have a different husband now. However, it turns out that turning him into a werewolf is not a permanent solution to the problem. Because he's still around, he's just a werewolf. He's just hanging out in the woods being a wolf for 5 years. My poor boy. Until the king goes hunting. And Bisclafé runs up to him and is like, Friend! Let's be friends! I love you! And everyone goes, that wolf's acting super weird, let's not murder it.
It's so cute! He's just a good wolf, he knows how to bow to the king!
Right, he's being the most polite wolf.
He's so polite.
And everyone agrees that they're not going to finish hunting him because, he's just so nice. He's a good boy, everyone says. Let's just take him home, he's a good boy.
Yeah. And he just is now the good boy at court.
Yeah, he's just hanging out at court being a wolf.
Yeah.
And he only shows signs of viciousness twice. And one is when the toy boy turns up to court. And everyone is like, that's the first time that wolf has ever tried to attack anyone. There must be something wrong with that gentleman.
Yeah.
We cannot believe that Bisclafé would be vicious to anyone without a really good reason. Because he's a good boy.
He is such a good boy that when the wolf bites someone, they're like, well, what did you do to the wolf?
Right! Which reminded me very much of that dog saint.
Yeah!
The one whose miracle is identifying Saint Guinefort. Which I'm definitely saying wrong. Because it's in modern French. It's a legendary 13th century French greyhound. Who's unjustly killed. Oh no, I'm not thinking of this. This is a different dog saint. I'm not thinking of a saint. I'm thinking of the dog that participated in a trial because the dog was the prime witness to accusing the murderer.
A few times, actually.
Yeah, on the you've got the faithful hound who keeps attacking the person who murdered their master, and this has been accepted as legal evidence.
Yeah, in several places, if I'm not mistaken.
Including, I think, France.
Yeah. France has some wacky trials. I mean, so have we, but they have.
Oh, this is what's happening with Bisclafé, is that they're like, a dog this good would not just attack you for no reason. So if he's attacking you, you must have done something.
And they are proven correct.
They are proven correct. Because the king goes on a little tour with his best friend, the wolf.
Mm.
And when they come to Bisclafé's old estate, he also attacks his wife. And two and two are put together. and everyone is like, okay, so what did you do? The two of you. What did you do with Bisclafé? Because We are seeing signs here. We are figuring this out.
It just seems like you maybe murdered your husband and this was his pet wolf.
Right. It seems like this wolf knows who done it.
And to be fair, they cannot possibly have been expecting, no, I didn't murder my husband, that's him.
Yes, everyone is very surprised when they're like, oh, no, I just stole his shirt. And he's been hanging out with you at court for 5 years as a wolf. So they get his clothes back.
It's not relevant to the story, but it is important to me personally. This is one of the first ever constitutional werewolves in all of literature. As in werewolves who just are werewolves. They're not cursed by anyone. They're not turned into a wolf by the gods. They're just living their werewolf life.
It's one
of the first times that's ever happened in all of literature. Oh yeah, the moon thing came much later.
He's a good boy and a pioneer.
He is a trendsetter.
Our second t-shirt is Wolf howling under the trees. It just says trendsetter. Then he gets back his clothes, and there's an extremely cute. They're like, give him his clothes, and he's like unbothered, refusing to react until someone is like, do you think maybe it's just embarrassing to get dressed in front of everyone?
Yeah. So they sent him to the king's bedroom.
They shut him in the king's bedroom with his clothes, and they like give him a good long time, and then eventually they go and knock, and the king is like, "Hello, Biographical?"
The king goes in, and Biographical is lying, Sleeping Beauty style, like eyes closed, waiting for his prince to come on the bed. And the king wakes him by, I'm going to quote my personal translation. Obviously, I'm not going to quote the medieval French. The king gave him, so the things the king gave him are more than 100 kisses, all of the lands and titles that had been stolen from him, and something else that I won't tell you, reader. And I cannot be the only one going, his penis! His penis! I know what it is. It's his penis.
That is remarkably frank about what it's not telling you.
It's my favourite quote from all of Marie de France. I have read it 5,000 times, and every time I get to that passage, and I'm like, yes, Marie, tell them.
This werewolf is gay. Also, this king.
Super gay.
This
and
king,
it's very funny.
Werewolf furry love situation, because he is still a werewolf.
Like, I have just flipped to that page in my copy, and the pages are loose from how many times I have held it open to the king embraced the knight. More than 100 kisses he laid upon his face. And he gave him back all of the lands and the powers that had been taken from him. And he gave him something else that I'm not telling you.
Amazing. Iconic.
I think that is you know that Roman Empire meme? Like, how often do men think about the Roman Empire? This is my Roman Empire. I think about this at least once a week.
We are Biographical stans on this podcast.
I am a full-time Biographical stan, and I intend to make no changes about that.
I do love him. He's not straight.
What biographical details do you think you might be able to glean from Marie's absolutely stunning use of the phrase, something else I won't tell you?
She had a sense of humour. And was working in a society where everyone, like, we understand what is meant by this. They must have also at the time.
Yeah. And this
you wouldn't write that if people wouldn't get it.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because I think we as modern readers, or at least as modern readers who aren't super well versed in like medieval literature, which like no judgment, we've all got different hobbies. I don't really understand physics. Like but like as modern readers, I think we have a tendency to assume that because we are much more free with our literal language around certain topics.
Yes.
That people who were not saying those things were not thinking them.
Yeah.
And I have to say, in medieval times, not only were they saying and thinking those things, they were saying and thinking things that would not get published today.
Well, you could not make a Disney movie out of Biographical.
I mean, I would try, but the mouse would hunt me for sport.
Which also happened to Biographical.
But yeah, like, there's an absolutely amazing, I think, contemporary French lay where a guy gets granted 3 wishes by, I want to say, one of the archangels, I forget which one. It shows up and goes, you are such a great guy that God is giving you 3 wishes. And he goes home and, like, And he gets into an argument with his wife immediately because she's like, well, you wouldn't be able to be such a great guy if I wasn't supporting you. You should give me one of your wishes. Surely that's fair. And he's so annoyed that he says, I wish you were covered in vaginas. Except the word is not vagina, it's a ruder word. And she immediately covered in vaginas head to toe. And she goes, well, I still think I should get one of your wishes. And he goes, fine, have one. And she immediately wishes that he was covered head to toe in penises. So they have to use the third and final wish to
everything back how it was.
Ungenital themselves. Yeah.
Well, assume.
Like, this is the environment of sort of, I think that's relatively contemporary. I could be like, but that kind of story, these kind of like raunchy French songs were really popular for most of the medieval period. Like, people liked silly, raunchy stories.
People always have liked stories about dicks.
Yeah, people think it's funny.
There is no point in history where a man gets 3 wishes, has a stupid argument with his wife, and then she's covered in genitals, and then he's covered in genitals, and then they have to, like, waste all their wishes on the whole covered in dicks situation. Since humans have developed language, there is no group of humans that would not have found the covered in dicks wishes story funny.
Exactly, like, that's just funny, I'm sorry. And it's even funnier in this extremely religious context.
Right.
It's just like, the Archangel Michael is just watching this going, what is wrong with you people?
God thinks you're so impressive, he's giving you 3 wishes, and you have spent them all on the dick argument.
Like, oh my god, this is why Lucifer fell. He looked at humans doing this, went, really? Them? Really?
These are the favourites?
You like them? The dick face people. My point being, I think it's really nice as a biographical detail that Marie has a sense of humour. She has like this deeply queer thread throughout her works, but it's not sad repressed gay. It is sometimes sad, but very seldom repressed.
Yes, she's expecting all of you to understand what she's doing with Bisclavaret is that then Bisclavaret and the king, in the king's bedchamber, kissing 100 times, are being gay.
Yeah, they are. It's great because, like, the thing is, kisses in medieval texts are very dicey because, like, kissing as a show of loyalty was a thing. Kissing on the lips as a show of loyalty was a thing. Platonic kissing is a thing in a lot of times and places.
Right, including ours.
Yeah, like, I platonically kiss my parents on the face. It's not as weird as I have to assume mostly American people who disagree with me on Twitter would have you believe.
Well, no, in the same way as you'll find people who are saying, "Oh, we need to bring back kissing on the hand." I have never had a lover I have not kissed on the hand.
Yeah, it's like, look, okay, I'm not actually on Twitter, but people send me images of tweets that they think I'll hate because those are the kind of friends I cultivate.
Welcome to the modern world.
Yes. And one of the things is, like, you do see a lot of people who are who respond to, no, this was feudal kissing with, honestly, historians want to hide all the gays. And I'm like, no, it's just, these people cannot all have been having sex with one another or they wouldn't have gotten anything done. Like, if everybody who we knew had kissed one another in a medieval text had also been having sex with them on the reg, like, they wouldn't have had time to run a country.
Also, there'd be quite a lot of sex just happening in full court.
Yeah.
Which seems unlikely that that's what was meant.
Yeah, like, we know feudal kissing was a thing. What we do not know, to my knowledge, to have been a thing is feudal sex as a show of loyalty. I am not aware of any point at which medieval kings were expected to sleep with their knights.
No, that was an optional activity.
That was recreational.
Recreational sex is the best sex.
I'm sure there was lots of very bland, dutiful sex going on between men and women, but very little between men and men. Because bland, dutiful sex is usually the kind of sex that has, like, an expected outcome of children.
Right. Crucially, that you had no duty to have the gay sex, so you were only doing that for fun.
Yeah. Is that our thesis?
It's one of many things we believe.
But yes, and, you know, you can even have a spicy little, like, part-time lesbian situation with your shape-shifting bird boyfriend.
Right, it's interesting to me that all of the kind of unwedded bliss, both in Yonic and in Gigama, is when your lover is shut up with you in the women's situation and is not fully masculine.
Yeah.
You've got your bird shapeshifter who can be a woman, and you've got Gigama who got shot in the dick.
Yeah.
And spends like a year and a half in the story, not cured of having been shot in the dick, shut up with his lady and the lady's maid in this walled garden that is a kind of sanctum of femininity.
Yeah.
And that's when they're happiest.
Yeah.
It's very interesting. It's, not a masculine position to be in. He's not like, and now I must go and have adventures and free you from imprisonment here. He's like, I have made it into the walled garden with the ladies. I'm stay here.
I think it was a Tumblr post went around a while ago of a college or something that had gender segregated dorms where the guys kept coming over to the women's half and going, "Oh, it's like clean here and no one's punching each other."
I want to live in civilization with the women.
Yes. That is very much the Grigamar experience.
Right. Everyone previously hassling him over finding a wife, making him hunt things, do like manly exercises, go to battle.
I point
he can
out
just be in this garden with the ladies and like there's kissing.
And the thing is, all of these unsuccessfully heteronormative knights are explicitly said to be brilliant knights. They're loyal, they're good at jousting, they're good at fighting, they're good to their people. The only thing they're failing at is being husband material.
Right. They're failing at the heterosexuality, but they're great, which is very different from the gayness is the joke kind of writing.
Yeah.
The gayness is, to some extent, the tragedy sometimes, because, there's this duty they cannot perform, but it's more of one of the obstacles most of the time.
Is
one of the challenges in life is being gay, and what you need to do is find a lady who is, down with a little cross-dressing.
Yeah. Find yourself a shape-shifting bird person.
Honestly, I'm not that hard up enough to be making wishes about it, but if a bird flew in my window and turned into an attractive, gender-ambiguous person and was like, I am here to fulfill your dreams, I would not turn them down.
Yeah, I mean, I'm Ace and I would not turn them down.
If only because it's cool to have a girlfriend who can turn into a bird.
Yeah, I'd be like, okay, we're going to have to come up with some fantasies. I don't have a huge repertoire, but we can work it out.
I'm game.
Just let me go read some Star Trek fanfic real fast.
They have heard all the ideas.
I need to get some ideas going, but we'll figure it out.
That's our thesis.
Far be it from me to suggest that we should apply modern day gender and identity and sexuality labels to historical figures. But given that we are coming at this from a biographical angle, I would like to ask, what do you make of the gender? Because we've agreed that this is full of gender.
This is very full of gender, and in my experience, people who write stuff that's full of gender are at least thinking about it. Or at least have some gender feelings. It is possible there are people for whom those gender feelings are, I'm just really interested in how other people deal with this thing.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's a guarantee. I think Marie de France would not turn down the shapeshifter who flew in the window. And I think the shapeshifting would be a perk. I also think she would not turn down being the shapeshifter who flew in the window.
I mean, is that not goals?
There may be people who do not want to be a bird and gender shifter, but those people I do not understand.
It's interesting because Marie de France has been widely identified as the first known woman to write francophone verse. And there's something very interesting to me about a woman who is even outside of the queerness elements, which I think are omnipresent throughout. I don't think you can convincingly argue that there is not queerness throughout these texts.
No, at least only by misreading.
Yeah, I think you have to get things just factually incorrect to say there is nothing queer about this.
Yeah, you just have to not understand what's going on.
You can argue against specific modern labels. I think you could make a case that no, none of this is gay, it is all X. None of this is specifically trans, it is all Y. I think those are both reasonable arguments. They're boring, but they're reasonable. You can't say this isn't queer.
Right. I think whatever you say, there's queer stuff and there's gender stuff. Whether our author would have personally applied our current modern labels to either herself or her characters is impossible to know.
Yeah, it's a real we went to the moon in the fucking sky moment.
Right. No, we need you to look at this list of micro labels and clarify. And she's like, I'm sorry, you eradicated what? Like the actual smallpox?
Exactly. It's like, no. I just, okay, so, tough is not technically considered a slur by most people, but it has been identified that way by some specific groups. And she's just there going, we don't have polio?
Right.
But yeah, discourse on modern labels aside, I think it is interesting to see that there is all of this gender, and I think there is queerness beyond identity around gender, but there is a lot of gender in here, and I think that's interesting for someone who is now the first woman we known to ever have done this kind of writing.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean she was the first woman to do it.
Just the first one that we know of whose stuff has survived, so.
Yeah, a lot of people didn't put their name in like the first 3 paragraphs of what they wrote.
Right, which has really helped us identify this author.
Yeah, but again, that is a choice on her part. She could have used a male pseudonym or just not identified herself. She says overtly at the beginning of one of her stories, my name is Marie. That's who I am. It's a woman's name. You know this about me, if nothing else. I am a French woman called Marie.
Yeah. Here's me putting the little flag out.
And I think it's very unlikely.
It's interesting also to put it at the beginning of the poem rather than the end.
Yeah.
Like putting the little flag out that says, you are reading a woman's work. Enjoy.
And there are other women who put their names in cryptograms on the first page of their work. Like, that is a thing that some nuns were known to do.
But it does say something to be like, no, if you're going to read these poems, you're going to read them knowing whose they are.
Exactly. And I think while we can say we don't know for sure that she was the first woman to do this kind of writing, it's very likely she wasn't. But it was definitely a male-dominated sphere, otherwise it would just be statistically ridiculous that the vast majority of what remains that we have today is male.
Yeah, it wouldn't be likely.
Yeah, it was most likely a very male-dominated sphere, and she chooses to put her foot forwards with, I'm a French woman called Marie.
Yeah.
There's just a real strong thread of identity here that makes me want biographic details about this woman, about what made her have that sense of identity and that desire to put identity at the forefront of her work.
Yeah. Definitely suggestive of thinking about what it means to Marie to be Marie.
Yeah. Because she was thinking about it.
So if anyone has got a time machine, we're putting in a bid for like Henry II's court, but specifically because we want to hang out with the queer poets there.
Yeah, I mean, I want to know, did she have a writing group? Like, did she have a bunch of other, like, weird French poets in some English court somewhere to whom she was reading Biographical and going, and something else I'm not going to tell you, mate?
Right. Were people there to be like, no, leave that line in, it's great?
Yeah. I wasn't sure, was that too much? No, Marie.
Am I being too obvious? Like, no, it's the funniest thing in the whole poem. It's great.
I think possibly, like, I did a 3-year degree in medieval literature, and that might be the funniest line I read in all of that time.
She was funny. And she wrote about deeply non-straight knights and fairy shapeshifters. And if you are bored of the same old Arthur stories, add these to your lexicon. They fit exactly into the genre, but they're new and fun.
I would describe them as being for fans not of BBC Merlin, but of BBC Merlin fanfiction.
Should we, having, I think, concluded everything we can about Marie de France, and we really do recommend enjoying these stories because they're great, but we should roll for next...
Before we roll some dice, I actually need to ask you, is this going back in the hat?
I would not be opposed to it being back in the hat. I don't know if I personally have more things to say about it.
I mean, it depends what reading we get, to be honest. We sort of did luck out with this one because there are some that might have been interesting.
Yeah. I think we should put something new in the hat.
Okay, I am already putting in a different medieval text that I have been thinking about replacing this with. All right.
I don't know why I expected anything different.
Hey, it's my slot and I'll do what I want with it.
Absolutely. You have the full right to do this. And in hindsight, of course, this is what you have done.
I'm totally happy if Mary goes back in, but I have an extremely apropos replacement if she doesn't. Cool.
There we go.
I've got some numbers to roll.
You have, because it's your turn next time.
Yes. And we are on 14 schools of analysis left, right? Yes. Okay, so 1 to 14, generate. I did get 11! Commercial!
Commercial reading of...
And random number generator, up to 101. Ooh. 2. The Land Before Time franchise.
Oh, that's interesting.
That is interesting. I think I'm going to get hate mail from Don Bluth fans, but I'm excited about it.
I look forward to getting hate mail about Don Bluth fans, because by this point in our release schedule, it will be a welcome relief from the hate mail from Flat Earthers.
Oh god, that'll still be coming in, won't it?
It will still be coming.
We haven't received any yet, but please rest assured that we are not reading it.
We are masters of both the delete and block buttons.
Yeah, I've successfully not been on Twitter for a while now. I don't intend to stop.
Yeah.
I
am really interested in what we're going to conclude about The Land Before Time as like a commercial.
How many are there? Aren't there like 20? I'm going to have to narrow down so we don't both have to watch 20 Land Before Time movies. Let me just quickly look up how many there are.
I think it is a large number.
Hang on 1 second. Yeah, I know there's like at least like a dozen because I watched that many as a child. But there are, okay, there's a 14. And then also TV shows and things like that.
I am not going to watch 14 films in the next 2 weeks, even if I want to, and I don't want to.
You mean you don't want to see do you want to see the one with the aliens?
I mean, kinda, but I don't want to see all 14.
I'm going to say the first one and like a midpoint sequel and a late sequel.
Yeah, and see if we can pinpoint the point where it got to be purely a cash-in process.
My understanding, I do not know this for sure, my understanding is that like the quality has spiked and dropped cyclically in the sequels because there is a quite dedicated fan base. And those fans periodically age into being creators.
Well, I think it's probably a very interesting fan base as well, because a lot of people have seen The Land Before Time, as in the original The Land Before Time. And then there is a smaller group of people who have seen a lot of Land Before Times.
I think also, this may be me being, like, sufficiently younger than you that I was watching children's movies in a different era. But I have more memories of the ads for Land Before Time sequels than I do for any of the films.
I don't think I was aware until a couple of years ago that there were sequels to The Land Before Time.
Every single VHS of any non-Disney children's movie had an ad for at least one Land Before Time sequel. Usually with a musical number. The sequels didn't start coming out until the mid-90s. And I remember them being ubiquitous in the early 2000s, at which point I assume you were not watching a huge number of like direct-to-video Sleeping Beauty adaptations.
No, I mean, early 2000s I would have been still watching CBBC drama series, but not...
Yeah, like, I feel like this was like, if you had a copy of the American Tail sequel, which I did, you probably saw the ads for every single Land Before Time sequel about 50 times.
I did have Fievel Goes West.
I had the other sequel, the one that no one talks about, and I had like...
Again.
I had previously joked.
There had been an original American Tale, so as far as I was concerned, Fievel Goes West was the American Tale.
Yeah, I never saw the original one, but I will say, bearing in mind that we're being recorded, I will specify that this is a joke, but I have previously referenced the American Tale sequel that is not Fievel Goes West as my sexual awakening, because it was the movie that happened to be playing the first time I had confusing feelings. This is a true fact about my life.
I will happily go on record, and this is not a joke, that my sexual awakening was Orlando Bloom as Legolas.
See, that's valid. What's not valid is a cartoon mouse. I was just like sat in front of it, like having a completely unrelated daydream, and then snapped back into myself and realised I was watching an American Tale.
And from that moment, you felt slightly weird about the American Tale.
Yeah, there's a reason I've never seen the original since.
We should put Fievel Goes West in the list next time we...
We should. We can. That's what we'll replace Land Before Time with it, because I don't think we're going to want to talk about that twice. Okay, I need to go work out which sequels I'm making you watch.
You need to select between the cute dinosaur choices.
Yeah, I'm thinking currently I'm looking at 1 and 5 are definitely going to be there, probably. So if you want to watch the first one, I will at some point in the next few days send you sequels.
I think the original Land Before Time is going to be my bedtime viewing tonight, yes.
I'm sure you'll be delighted to know that all of the sequels are musicals.
I am, actually. I would like to see the tiny dinosaurs.
And some of them slap. I have very distinct memories of being in my school dining room at secondary school, like in the dining hall, just like with an entire table of people singing Friends for Dinner from Land Before Time 5.
Please select your choice of sequels with consideration to whether they have good musical numbers.
Land Before, if I'm correct about which one it is, Land Before Time 5 absolutely fucks on the musical number front.
All right, we'll do that one then, and then what are the late numbers?
Yeah, that's the one that Friends for Dinner is from.
Fantastic. Thank you, listener, for your time and attention. Go and read French medieval poetry about werewolves, because it's great.
And while you're doing that, we will be watching The Land Before Time.
Two things that have a lot in common thematically, as I'm sure everyone can understand.
I think Marie de France would have liked Land Before Time.
I hope so.
Once she found out about polio vaccines and the moon landing, that would have been my next thing to show her.
Okay, listener, we'll see you next time for our dinosaur discussions.
Bye-bye.
Bye. You've been listening to Analysis Roulette, a podcast applying a randomly selected mode of analysis to a randomly selected creative work, just to see what happens. Your hosts have been Dia and Duck. You can find us on Spotify or on YouTube, and if you'd like to get in touch, you can send us an email at analysisroulette@gmail.com. And remember, if you like our show, share it with your friends, and if you don't like our show, share it with your enemies.